Not only will we be talking about buy low candidates, but also I'm going to be giving you the exact cost of what you should be paying and where they are in my rest of season rankings. Now, before we get to the guys this week, I do want to recap what we talked about last week and where we stand with these players now. Obviously, we've been talking about the Miami Dolphins options such as Tyree, Waddle, and HN for a couple of weeks now, with the expectations that Tua was indeed coming back, that Tua would be back in either weeks 8 or 9. And hell, it's week 8. Sounds like Tua will return. So yes, Tyreek Hill, high wide receiver 1. Yes, Jalen Waddle, high end wide receiver 2. Yes, Davante HN, mid RB1 in fantasy. I hope you bought low on him last week. I hope you bought low on him the week prior. The window's probably shut now, but it can't hurt to send an offer if you decided not to the first 2 weeks we said it. Now going over to Brian Robinson, with Brian Robinson, very awkward spot where obviously he comes out, has a great game. Can I come out and can I tell you, oh, still go send an offer for him? I don't know. You have the Jaden Daniels injury now. You have a 40-point performance here for the Commanders. I think everybody sees Brian Robinson back and healthy. Your window to trade for Brian Robinson is probably closed at this point. We included Davante Adams in the video last week, but obviously we recorded that before Davante Adams was traded to the Jets. So at that point, Davante Adams was just a wide receiver that had missed a month with a hamstring. Now, obviously, your time to trade for Adams maybe he's passed. I will reiterate, he's still a wide receiver 2 rest of season. If somebody was maybe upset that he started off a little slower here with the New York Jets, you go ahead and you buy him if you can. Xavier Worthy, we talked about. I think that Xavier Worthy is still actually a phenomenal buy low candidate. Obviously in a very tough matchup against the 49ers, Mahomes didn't do anything. Mahomes still had no passing volume. Mahomes didn't have a passing touchdown. And Xavier Worthy didn't do anything in fantasy either. But now, not only do you have the injury to Hollywood, not only do you have the injury to Rice, but now Juju Smith-Schuster is out as well. And Xavier Worthy last week had a career-high 8 targets. So I do want to reiterate, I know we talked about him as a buy low candidate last week. I still think that Worthy is an interesting buy low candidate if you can pick him up as a wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4, where I do believe he has wide receiver 2 upside rest of season. We talked about Rico Dowdle being that buy low candidate coming off of the embarrassing loss to the Detroit Lions with the Dallas Cowboys offense. And yeah, nothing's changed. Obviously, wasn't the buy. Still expect that Dowdle is a low-end running back too that you can rely upon going into the future. We had Marvin Harrison Jr. as a buy low candidate. Honestly, I may be waving the white towel at this point. I may be throwing it in, whatever the phrase is. I mean, at this point, if you're looking at the passing volume that you have in Arizona, there's just not nearly enough to go around to give production to both McBride, Harrison, especially if Kyler's going to be spreading the ball out to some of these secondary pieces. So Marvin Harrison Jr., I don't think he has low-end wide receiver 1 upside rest of season. I think he's like a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 at the moment. That can probably improve as the year goes on and finish as a mid wide receiver 2 to high-end wide receiver 2. And then with Brian Thomas Jr., he was our number 1 buy low candidate last week. Obviously, comes out, just absolutely destroys in the London game against New England. Honestly, if you didn't buy low on Brian Thomas Jr. last week, it's probably not happening for you. You're probably not going to be able to get him now. But let's move over to what we have with the buy low candidates this week. Odunze is a player that I think you should treat as a throw-in in a deal. Where if you are in a 12-team format where you can start multiple flex spots, if you can go and approach an owner and say, hey, I have Jaden Reed. I see you have Devonta Smith. I'll give you Reed and for Smith and give me Odunze as well as a sweetener. That's the type of structure that I am looking for. What's actually funny is y'all know I'm going through and I am breaking down and reviewing teams on the live stream every single night through the league analyzer over there on flockfantasy.com. And you have that far right column that is the best waiver wire options. And a lot of teams that I review in the live stream, Odunze is actually on the waiver wire in your league. Now, obviously, those are shallower formats. And if that is your scenario, I would highly recommend picking up Odunze. Where, yes, this is a wide receiver that's been very inconsistent. Yes, this is a wide receiver that it's hard to come out here and say, oh, okay, we know for sure that this is a player that we can start in 2 weeks. No, I mean, at this point, it's impossible to say that you're even close to considering to start Rome. We had the one big spike week, but that was in a game where you had no Keenan Allen, while at the same time, you're in a situation in which we should still expect that DJ Moore is the wide receiver 1. So now that Keenan Allen's in, you've actually seen the volume dramatically come down for Rome Odunze. Rome over the past 3 weeks has only had a total of 11 targets. Rome Odunze so far this season as well is sitting here with a single game with double-digit fantasy points and has been primarily unusable. Now, going into the future, I do want to take a step backwards, and I want to acknowledge the fact that this is a wide receiver that was a top 10 NFL draft pick. Not only was he a top 10 NFL draft pick, but this is also a player that was 21 years old. So, I mean, going into this season, the expectation was maybe, yeah, you are going to start off a little bit slower as that rookie option with the veterans surrounding you. And the same thing that you have with Caleb Williams, where Caleb Williams, the rookie quarterback, starts a little slowly. Obviously, Caleb has absolutely crushed over the past 2 weeks. And going into the future, if we're looking at some of these matchups for Rome, a lot of them look great. You get to play Washington, you get to play Arizona, New England. Now, yes, you have to play Minnesota twice, which is absolutely brutal, but you get to play Detroit twice as well. And we know Detroit's going to be a pass funnel where the passing volume in Chicago should be sky high. So I do want to reiterate, I know in those shallower formats, Rome Odunze may be on your waiver wire. In that case, please go out there and pick him up. And in a deeper league, there's no way that Rome is on your waiver wire. And what I'm looking to do is actually treat him as a throw-in another deal. Like to go through and look at some of the trades that I've seen on the trade finder on flockfantasy.com. I saw somebody actually trade Tyler Algier for Rome Odunze. Give me Rome. I saw somebody trade Ricky Pearsall for Rome. Now, I've drafted Ricky Pearsall in a ridiculous amount of underdog drafts. I really hope he comes out here and crushes with the injury to Ayuk and Deebo Samuel with pneumonia. But ultimately, I still think Rome Odunze is a much better prospect, and I think Caleb continues to improve. Somebody traded away Alexander Madison for Rome Odunze, which I think is very interesting. Somebody traded away Jamison Williams for Rome Odunze, and now that Jamison is dealing with the suspension, I think if you can't put Jamison on the IR in your league, I'd be looking at that as well. The wide receivers that I have Rome Odunze ranked alongside rest of season are going to be Darnell Mooney, Ladd McConkey, and Keenan Allen as a wide receiver 4 in fantasy. Now let's move over to our next option. This is going to be Chase Brown. Now, obviously, you hear Chase Brown. It's very hard to figure out exactly how you should be valuing him. There are a couple different things that I would definitely point you towards if you are looking for a baseline expectation. One, you can always go to the expert consensus values on flockfantasy.com with the rankings page. Those are completely free for you. Of course, if you hit Add Expert, you can actually sort by my rankings. Exactly. My name is Mason Dodd. If you're wanting to do that, that would be behind a paywall. But another thing that's completely free on flockfantasy.com for you is going to be using the trade finder. So just go over to that trade finder whenever you want and actually put the player that you're interested in trading for in that. You can put in your exact league settings as well. And you can see all the trades that have been made recently in real fantasy football leagues with your exact league settings and with the exact player that you are thinking about trading for. So we are doing that with all the players in this video. That way I can try to give you a great sense of what you should be looking to offer for these guys. And also, I do want to reiterate, all that stuff is free over there on flockfantasy.com. I'll leave the link to that in the description as well as the comment section if you are interested. But looking at Chase Brown, I have him at running back 22 in my rest of season ranks. I have him as that low end RB2. And I think it's safe to say at this point that Chase Brown has taken over as the starting running back in this Cincinnati Bengals backfield. Now, obviously, we can go back 2 weeks ago and we can look at the fact that after Zach Moss fumbles, all of a sudden, Chase Brown actually sees all the work. But we can see this week as well that Chase Brown actually sees 15 carries. Chase Brown also has 2 targets out of the backfield as well. This is in comparison to Zach Moss with only a total of 6 carries. Now, yes, they did split the snaps close to 50-50, but I'm more so going to be interested in what we have with the touches here. And also, if we go ahead and we look at the efficiency that we've had from these 2 running backs so far this season, I think really the Bengals were just looking for any reason to move on from Zach Moss, where you're looking at Zach Moss with a total of 0 games with more than 5 yards per carry. You're looking at Zach Moss with only 3 games with more than 3 yards per carry. In week 2, 2.83. In week 5, 2.6. In week 6, 2.1. In week 7, 1.1. Where on the other hand, if you look at Chase Brown, this is a running back that you've gone over 5 yards per carry in 4 of your games. You only had one game with fewer than 3 yards per carry. Chase Brown has been a more efficient running back. I understand yards per carry is the most basic of metrics and can be very, very skewed with a long play into how the running backs are utilized in their backfield. But if you look at it over a large sample size like this, it can just be a very baseline metric to identify that, yeah, Chase Brown had already been doing more with less. And if we're seeing the opportunity in this backfield trend upwards for Chase Brown, we're over the past month, 18 opportunities, 15 opportunities, 12 opportunities, 17 opportunities. It's a running back that's getting anywhere from that 15 to 18 opportunity mark. Going into the future, I think we could start seeing some games with 20 plus. And looking at his cost, I mean, it's not like he is being priced as if he is a starting running back in one of the league's best offenses where he is showing efficiency as well. I mean, going over to the trade finder, you can see that somebody traded Chuba Hubbard and Quentin Johnston for Jaden Reed and Chase Brown. So effectively, they gave up what was perceived to be a downgrade from Chuba to Chase Brown to pick up Jaden Reed at the same time. If you look at my rest of season rankings with the expectation that Jonathan Brooks comes back in relatively soon, I would actually rather have Chase Brown straight up over Chuba Hubbard rest of season, with Chase Brown being in a much, much better offense. Somebody traded away Tony Pollard and Keenan Allen for Josh Jacobs and Chase Brown. Well, I would rather have Jacobs straight up over Pollard. I'd rather have Chase Brown straight up over Keenan. Somebody traded away George Pickens for Chase Brown. Give me Chase Brown. Somebody traded away Zach Moss for Chase Brown. Obviously, at this point, I think that Chase Brown is the starter. And I'll tell you as well, I mean, I actually drafted a lot of Zach Moss in underdog drafts this year, and I didn't take nearly as much Brown. So I kind of hope I'm wrong here. I hope Zach Moss is the guy. It's just very difficult to assume that's the case at this point of the season. Going over to our next option, we are going to be looking at Chris Olave. With Olave, obviously, he has not done much at all so far this season. While healthy, I mean, Shaheed was a better option than Olave. You had the spike weeks, whereas Chris Olave this year has had only one game with 20 or more fantasy points. And Chris Olave has actually had 3 games with fewer than 5 points. Olave has given you a crazy low floor in this Saints offense. And what we said going back 2 weeks ago is as soon as Derek Carr goes down, you understand that nobody is startable in this offense outside of Alvin Kamara, and that is it. Then Olave obviously face plants, as you would expect. And then he gets in concussion. We have absolutely nothing this past week. And then coming back to the Chargers game in week 8, to be completely honest with you, I'm not expecting Olave to do anything. I'm probably going to be benching Olave in any league that I have him in. And I would advise you to do the same as well. Because with Chris Olave, even if he is back, the expectation is you're not going to have Derek Carr. This isn't a viable offense, but all reports right now are trending towards Derek Carr being good to go for this game starting in week 9. So if we get Derek Carr back in week 9 against the Carolina Panthers, and all of a sudden Chris Olave is in an offense where you have no Shaheed, you have not the worst quarterback play in the NFL, just maybe below average QB play. I think Olave all of a sudden turns into a target hog where he wasn't previously because Shaheed had been so effective. If I'm looking at my rest of season rankings, I have Olave ranked in the same range as like Jalen Waddle, George Pickens, and Xavier Worthy. Obviously, I'd well prefer Olave and Waddle over the other 2 options. But I think that there's a very realistic chance that you could, in your league right now, go out there and sell George Pickens. Go out there and move him for Chris Olave or Jalen Waddle, which I think would be a significant upgrade if we're thinking rest of season here once you are going to get the quarterback upgrade. Going over and looking at some of the trades that we see in the trade finder involving Olave. Somebody traded away Ladd McConkey, Juju Smith-Schuster for Olave, Tyrone Tracy, Tank Dell for Olave, Jamison Williams for Olave, Jordan Addison for Olave. Absolutely no brainer here in my mind. Now, going over to our next move, we are going to be looking at Christian McCaffrey. Now, this is the first time that I have said all season now to trade for McCaffrey. I've tried to show some restraint. I've tried to admit at every chance that I had that I'm an idiot. I have absolutely no idea what to expect. I don't know what the timeline looks like, yada, 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 yada. But we are beginning to get the rumblings. We are beginning to see McCaffrey back at practice. That happened last week. Now, obviously, it's not like he's practicing in full by any stretch of the imagination, but he's out there. And at the same time, you're hearing from Shefty, you're hearing from Ian Rappaport, just kind of preparing you to get McCaffrey back in, very similar to what they were doing with Tua. And now you're seeing that Tua is going to be playing this week. Now, what's very encouraging is to see the timeline that we have with CMC. Right now, the expectation, he is not going to be playing this week. But if he is already back at practice last week, going out there, stretching, blah, 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 not in any type of official capacity. But if he's practicing this week, and then you have the bye week next week, which he was going to miss regardless, and then coming out in week 10, I think it gives McCaffrey a very realistic shot to be playing. Now, I do want to reiterate, with a lot of these guys, they are long-term upsides, such as like Xavier Worthy, right? Such as Rome Odunze, the rookies, such as Christian McCaffrey, where we are thinking not for this week, not for next week. Where you're trading for McCaffrey is, hell, I'm 5-2. I'm 6-1. I can afford to think about long-term upside, long-term upside, long-term upside, and I don't have to think about the short term. Now, what will be interesting to note, and I do want to be completely fair with you here, is the Niners are 3-4. Obviously, they just lost Brandon Ayuk. Deebo Samuel is dealing with pneumonia. So there is a small possibility in which you end up getting the Niners losing this game, and then all of a sudden they're 3-5. Maybe at that point, they're a little bit less incentivized to bring McCaffrey in. In my mind, I think that it's not the end of the world. I mean, if this Niners team was instead of being a 3-4 roster, if they were 2-5, I'd be a lot more concerned about that. But if you look at where I have McCaffrey ranked rest of season, I have him in the same range as Aaron Jones, Brian Robinson, James Conner. Just to put my money where my mouth is, I may reach out to one of the developers over on flockfantasy.com who in the Flock League has Christian McCaffrey. I have James Conner, and I may see if they are willing to do that swap. I mean, it is a full PPR format, which is obviously where you'd be looking to add in McCaffrey. Would the expectations be that Christian McCaffrey averages an additional 3 points per game more than the next best running back in fantasy, 4 points per game more than the next best running back in fantasy, such as we saw last year? Would the expectation be that when McCaffrey comes back, he is the number one player and it's not even remotely close? Probably not. I'd say McCaffrey is probably going to be closer to the rest of the pack of those elite RB1s. But hell, if we see what we've gotten from Jordan Mason so far, I would give a baseline expectation of the Jordan Mason workload plus receiving usage, which in a full PPR format is just absolutely massive. Now, I don't want to tell you to go trade Cup. Don't trade Neighbors. Don't trade one of those elite level names if you can avoid it. Here's the price point I'd be willing to pay. I saw somebody on the Trade Finder trade Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt for CMC. Somebody traded Tony Pollard, JSN for CMC. Somebody traded Brian Robinson, Christian Kirk, Bucky Irving for CMC. Somebody traded Jordan Mason for McCaffrey. Somebody traded DeAndre Swift and Tyrone Tracy for McCaffrey. That's the price point in which I'd be looking to pay. And I'm only really interested in a team where I'm looking to contend for the playoffs. But again, I really recommend if you were going to be making a trade, go take advantage of the free trade finder we've put out for you over there on the site. We've also put out a free trade calculator that takes into account your exact league settings as well. And I want to remind you as well, if you play on Sleeper, ESPN, or Yahoo, you can actually link your fantasy football team with flockfantasy.com, and you can see your best waiver wire options, your league power standings, and the whole 9 yards, all for completely free. We spent a lot of money, a lot of time trying to go through and make these tools for you. You can find that link in the description as well as the comment section. I really hope you can find some use out of them. But I really appreciate you, and I really hope I get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.